Welcome back. So while South African consumers are trying to come to terms this morning with how they're going to cope with the steep increase in fuel prices, the country suffered another blow with the gross domestic product or GDP figure showing just how poorly the economy has been performing. According to Stats SA, the economy shrunk by 2.2% in the first quarter of this year. And this is a contrast from a positive end in 2017 where GDP grew by 3.1%. So we're discussing this morning, of course, the fuel price and the impact that it is likely to have. John Lewis, economist at FNB, is with us here in studio. We also have joining us from our Port Elizabeth studio, energy analyst Sandisiwe Ngcemane, and we'll be joined by Leighton Beard from the AA as well. But John, let's come to you. You now have what is a bit of a knock in terms of bad news with that 2%, 2.2% GDP loss yesterday. And on the back of that, now you see this fuel price increase. We've had the VAT increase. We know that tariffs are going to go up in terms of electricity. And so the whole basket of inflationary products seems to be on the up. So talk to us about that.
Well, yes, I think firstly, this can quickly turn sentiment around. We saw in the first quarter FNB Consumer Confidence Survey a big jump in consumer confidence. A lot of it's, I believe, related to the so-called Ramaphoria. And perhaps an over-expectation about what the new president could achieve and how quickly. This bad news economically, the fuel price coupled to the GDP, can quickly turn that sentiment around. And that can have a negative impact on consumer demand by itself, just because sentiment weakens. Then there is also the rands and cents impact. 82 cents per litre gets taken out of the consumer's pocket. That's disposable income that's not going to be spent on something else. So it can dampen growth in consumer demand as well, just by itself. And then, of course, if one looks at the year-on-year inflation rate in the fuel price, that's gone up from about 8.5% in the last month to 16.5%. That means a slightly higher, possibly a slightly higher CPI inflation rate directly as a result of the fuel price going up. I don't think that's enough on its own to bring about interest rate hiking yet, given the inflation target. But what it could mean, it could confirm our view, or could help stop any further rate cutting relief for consumers. So it's an interest rate impact and a taking disposable income out of people's pockets impact and a sentiment impact.
And of course, you know, the speculation aside, the forecasting aside, the real issue is that this is going to hit people in their pockets in the true sense, because you have all of these prices going up, and we've seen how many employers are totally incapable of actually matching that with regard to salary increment, John.
No, absolutely. It's got to take away some, it takes away some disposable income, and as you mentioned, it comes with other bad news at the same time. The economy doesn't grow so well. That means job creation is not as good. We know that the effective personal tax rate is creeping up as bracket creep is not fully adjusted for. The VAT rate has gone up. So it's a whole lot together. And as I say, that can, over and above the actual direct rands and cents impact, this can all contribute to turning consumer sentiment around, or consumer confidence around, from that big jump that we had in the first quarter survey.
Let's welcome Leighton Beard in our Pretoria studio. Leighton, good morning and thanks for joining us today. And, you know, firstly, just looking at the fuel price and exactly what it is made up of. You've got the fuel levy, which is essentially a general tax. So it's a tax that goes back into the fiscus, and it's not necessarily used for road or transport related issues. So what's your take on that? Is it too high? Is it fair priced right now?
Yeah, good morning. Look, it goes back into the fiscus, can be used for anything, for building schools, can be used for buying school books, building clinics, whatever. It is high. You know, we believe that the increases to the general fuel levy and the road accident fund levy that came into effect in April were above inflation, and certainly didn't match what was going on in terms of salaries and wages that people are earning. So we believe that these fuel taxes certainly are very high, and that's one of the reasons why we are paying more for our fuel than, for instance, our neighbouring countries are. Combined, these are R5.30 of every litre of petrol, and that's a huge amount of money.
And that's one of the bugbears for South African consumers, because they want to know, why are we paying more than our immediate neighbors? You know, what is it that we could possibly cut out or cut on with regard to all the taxes that go into the fuel price, Leighton?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if you look at the fuel price at the moment and you see how it's been comprised, 5.30 Rand is a big amount of money. I mean, it's almost 40%, 35, 38% of every litre of fuel. And I don't think everybody understands that that is being added to the litre of fuel that they pay. If we take that amount out of the fuel price, we're looking at paying around 10 Rand a litre. Instead, we're paying 15 Rand a litre. So I think a lot of people are not only concerned about it, but are questioning exactly why these taxes are as high as they are and why they increase year on year, many cases above inflation.
And another issue is, of course, the state of our road and transport infrastructure in the country. And considering that, you know, the fuel levy is used in general, as we said, it goes back to the fiscus and it could be used for anything. With regard to road infrastructure and transport related issues, you know, how much of the levies that we are taxed on in that fuel price goes towards that?
Well, I mean, obviously the fiscus determines how much money gets spent on road infrastructure and transport-related initiatives, you know, and that would take some money from the fuel levy. But the fuel levy itself is not designated specifically for road infrastructure development. I think that is another issue that is, you know, that is concerning to South Africans. They're being told as well on a lot of roads in the country, and they're seeing that infrastructure isn't improving, and yet they're just being asked to carry on paying more and more each year for their fuel above the tolls that they have to pay, which, by the way, have also gone up again this year.
Sandisiwe, geopolitics and the role that that plays in all of this, you know, that standoff between the United States and Iran at this point, how big a factor is that in what we are seeing currently?
Significant. As indicated, the biggest driver, of course, is the direction of the OPEC producers. That's to reduce the volumes being produced, which effectively translates to an increased cost for the crude. The role of America and their decision in relation to the Iranian deal would have a contribution as well, but I still think that the OPEC decision is probably a more domineering factor in the direction that we're seeing in terms of the fuel costs.
John, with regard to, you know, just the general impact, and we are always pro-poor in this outlook. So would there be space, would you think, might not be a very popular sentiment, but do you think there could be space for some discriminatory pricing when it comes to petrol?
Tough one. Well, there probably is already, in the fact that I would imagine that the wealthy use more petrol. You know, they drive private vehicles around, and whereas the lower income groups use public transport in the form of taxis or trains or whatever it might be more. So already, you know, there is probably less fuel use and less fuel costs for the lower income group. It's difficult to see that you could discriminate by income group, because this is not an income tax. This is a consumption-based tax. You pay, you know, whether it's be public transport, or I suppose you could have special rates for public transport, and you could register public transport providers such as taxis, and they could pay a different rate to private vehicles. It's possible, but you know, I think it's a big administrative burden. So tough to see something like that ever taking off.
Absolutely. And just a quick final one to you, Leighton. You see, for example, in a country like New Zealand, where they successfully managed to lobby government to make sure that the fuel levy goes directly to transport and related issues. Nothing of that goes towards anything else. Is that something that you think we should be doing in South Africa?
I'm going to take John's word on this and say also a tough one. It's difficult to say. I don't know whether that would necessarily be something that we'd want. I think what we'd rather want to see is a reduction in the increases to the fuel levies over a period of time. We're looking at R5.30 for the fuel levies combined. In our opinion, those levies are very high, and because they've been increasing by above inflation rates, we feel that that those increases are hitting consumers, specifically the poorest of the poor. And it doesn't only relate, I think we need to just clarify this, it doesn't only relate to fuel, petrol and diesel. When illuminating paraffin goes up, that also hits consumers, and it's all linked together. So we are quite concerned, I think, by the rate at which these levies are increasing, and I think we'd like to have some discussion around that issue.
And just a final one, Sandisiwe, just a yes or no. Do you think that fuel will be cheaper in South Africa if we produce our own?
Yes.
Well, that's where we're going to leave it.
And of course, been done already in this regard.
We have to do better, I suppose. And some difficult questions that we have to contend with, no doubt. But of course, we will have to look into these, and we have to think differently about everything, the economy, everything that we are faced with as a country. So we're going to leave it there for now.